What happened to semaphore signals? Now, this question may not apply to everybody, as in some countries they are still utilized pretty heavily. In the UK, which is where they were also invented, they're still seen on many secondary lines, though they are on a sharp decline, and they're barely present at all here in America anymore. Why? First of all, what the heck is a semaphore signal? Well, even if you aren't familiar with the name, you've probably seen one if you're familiar with railroads at all, especially if you've watched Thomas the Tank Engine, since they're there. Semaphore signals are actually one of the earliest forms of fixed railway signals, and they display different indications to train drivers by changing the angle of inclination of a pivoted arm, sometimes called a blade. They were patented in the early 1840s by a man named Joseph James Stevens, and would rise to become the most widely used form of mechanical signal for railroads all over the world. They were simple, but very effective, making them very attractive to pretty much every railway. Certainly they weren't the only type of mechanical signal, or signal in general, but they are the ones we're going to focus on today because signals on railways are a beast of a topic, and I would be here all day if we talked about every single type of signal. Regardless, the semaphore signals are one of the most recognizable ones commonly associated with railways, purely because of the arm thing. They swivel up and down and tell the train driver or engineer, whatever you want to call them, depending on the country you're in again, or have to deal with worldwide different terminologies driving me nuts, whether to slow down or keep going or stop. Not unlike a traffic light, except in this case, it's a swivelly arm thingy. The first one was erected by Charles Hutton Gregory on the London and Croydon Railway, which was later changed to the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, at New Cross, southeast London. In 1842, on the newly enlarged layout that also accommodated the South Eastern Railway. The success of this first signal led the type to being embraced by railways all over Britain and North America, and they'd surpass every other type of railway signal by 1870. Semaphore signals consist of two main parts: the wooden or metal arm, or blade, which is the pivoting application, and a spectacle. The spectacle has colored lenses, which move in front of some kind of light source. It varies quite a bit, depending on what time frame we're talking about here, but this addition helps show aspects at night. The light source could be anything from an oil lamp or a gas lamp to white LED clusters. In the early days, in order to make the green light, they actually used a blue lens. And this was because the old school lamps would actually produce yellow light, so they had to use blue, because if they used a green one, it would appear like yellow, and yellow was a different aspect. They didn't want to confuse the train driver, so they used blue. But once they had proper light sources that provided white light, they used green lenses. The arms would also have different arrangements too. There were two main types, lower quadrant and upper quadrant. In a lower quadrant signal, the arm pivots downward for the less restrictive indication. But in the upper quadrant signal, they pivot up. Now you might be asking, well, what's the difference here? Why would it matter? Shouldn't they just pick one and roll with it? Well, in some ways, there are reasons why you want to use one over the other, particularly the upper quadrant. In the old days, especially in Britain, lower quadrant was the most popular, but after the 1920s or so, they swiftly began to supplant all the lower quadrant ones with upper. The reason for this is that upper quadrant signals, should the signal wire, say, break, or the signal arm be weighed down by something like heavy snowfall, gravity would tend to cause the signal to drop into the danger position. Whereas with a lower quadrant signal, that would cause it to drop into the all clear position, which, well, I don't need to tell you which one is safer in this kind of situation. It's much better for the train to stop rather than keep going and possibly plow into something. The coloring and shape of the arm is also relevant too. Generally, particularly in the UK, they're red, as it was seen as the color that'd be most visible against the vast majority of backgrounds. In some cases, they'd actually put a sighting board behind the signal to make it even clearer, but that wasn't a super common practice. However, from 1872, new distant signal arms were distinguished by having a fishtail notch cut into them. This would help the train driver recognize that it was a distant signal, not a stop signal. And in the 1920s, they started painting the distant signals yellow to even further distinguish them. The aspects are generally pretty simple when it comes to these sorts of signals. If it's a stop signal, and the signal is facing out, you stop. That's it. That's what you do. It's often complemented by a red light. If it's clear, it's down, complemented by a green light. The aspects were very easy to learn and remember. When it comes to the distant signals, the aspects are technically the same, but mean slightly different things. Down is still all clear, but if it's out, it means caution, not necessarily stop. The reason for this is that it's a distant signal. It's designed to warn trains that, hey, you're probably gonna have to stop ahead. You should probably start slowing down now. That's what that means. Now, different countries had different rules regarding these, so it does vary quite a bit. The explanation I gave you are the general rules, and by that I mean the British ones. But regardless, they were a common sight on railways all over the world for over a century. So why don't we see these as much? Well, as I said, in places like the UK, you can still see them on secondary lines, but they started declining, especially here in America, in the beginning of the 1900s. At this point, they're almost entirely gone from main lines, and the reason is there's just better options now. Modern illuminated signals are much better, as those newer designs are much easier to see at longer distances, and can give the train engineer the same information, but from much further away. Plus, they're much easier to maintain, because semaphore signals are mechanical signals, and mechanical usually means you have to maintain them a lot more, and that costs more money. Simple light signals aren't as hard to maintain, and actually generally consume less energy overall, meaning that, in America, we just don't have mechanical signals at all, for the most part. As of this year, there's at least one on BNSF's Glorieta and Raton subdivisions through Glorieta Pass in New Mexico, which is used by Amtrak Southwest Chief. Like I said, in the UK, they are still present on the secondary routes, but not really on the main lines, and they are on the decline. Eventually, they're likely all going to be replaced, just because, as good as they are, there are just better choices now. Technology has moved on. There are easier, safer, and more cost-effective ways of train signaling. But I doubt semaphore signals will be gone entirely, at least in terms of, well, museums. These sorts of signals are pretty popular on heritage railways and museums because they're frankly pretty easy to store. They're just a pole. They're not that expensive to just get a hold of, so, you'll be able to see them still, and they'll always be a major component of railway history. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders, SomeDude267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, Lord R444, Iserfer 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Redlion, NS Productions 8104, Willjack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Caleb Rainwaters, Perez Drenton, Master of Done, Travis Delinsky, Jared Brussel, JBL Explorers, Tommy Rossini, Ben McCullough, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mark Holding, G Wiz, Mr. Terrevel, Hayden DeGrow, Metal for Life Guy, No, Kurt Forkum, Ohio Trucker 1, Mitchell Cole, Mr. Sleepy, Dr. Racer 78, AET Museum, Railroad Preserver 2000, Williard Conklin, Windy City Rails, DM Travel Typhoon, Harry, Drew Debris, George Kenny, Murder Dronsdal, Kevin Wood, Liam Wright, Morris Hillman Productions, NJ 1969, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Hannah Bird, Western Colorado History, and of course, my dad. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.